Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. This time out, we're checking out what just may be the most comprehensive audio interface that I've ever encountered. Let's get started. Today we're looking at the AudioFuse 16Rig from Arturia. Now this audio interface brings together an incredible array of analog and digital I/O and tons of features that make it ideal to be the centerpiece for both your studio and for a live rig as well. So I think the easiest way to dig into the AudioFuse 16Rig is to take a tour and take a look at, first of all the ways you get in and out of this box. Then we'll look at the software that accompanies it, and we'll also talk about using it standalone, and we'll look at all those different features that make this so ideal as a centerpiece for your studio. I'm actually going to jump us around to the back panel and we'll get started there because that's where a lot of the connections are. On the far right, we begin with 16 line level inputs. These feature high performance analog to digital converters, and the cool thing about it is with 16 inputs like that, if you have a stack of synthesizers or keyboards, you can leave all that gear connected, or if you're using external mic preamps, for example, all those can stay connected. You don't have to have a patch bay. Everything's just routed straight in and instantly accessible, so you can get to work quickly. Jumping back to the front panel, there are two inputs here, and these are the same as line inputs 1 and 2 on the back panel, but they give us instrument level, line level, and microphone level options here on the front. These are great if you want to plug in a microphone for recording, but they're also great for courtesy connections, if you will. So if someone comes into your studio, they have a keyboard, they want to plug a guitar in, whatever it might be, you don't have to go around to the back panel. You have two connections right here on the front. We also have a stereo 1/8" connection here on the front panel, and this is mirrored to the back panel channels 3 and 4. So if you have an 1/8" output on a device, whether it's a music player or an instrument, you can plug it right in here. On the back panel, we have stereo monitor outputs, and those are controlled right here on the front panel. We've got a volume control, we've got a mute control, and then we have an assignable switch. That can be set to control dim, you can set it to control mono for phase checks, or you can also set it to switch to a second set of speakers that use another set of analog outputs on the back panel. You do that assigning in the software, and we'll take a look at that in just a second. The back panel also features 8 line outputs, and again, this is great for just leaving your gear connected, whether it's a second set of monitors, whether you're routing out to a effects processor and bringing it back in through some of the inputs, whether you're doing a 5.1 monitoring setup, whatever it might be, all those connections are available for whatever you want to use them for. And again, we have 2 of those outputs mirrored here on the front panel, but the cool thing about these 2 outputs is that they actually can serve multiple functions. First of all, they can be line level outputs, and they can have an independent mix routed to them as well. We can also set those to be headphone outputs. So in addition to the main headphone output, we can have a second and a third headphone output if you're tracking musicians in your studio. A third mode for these allows them to serve as direct throughs. So you could, for example, plug a guitar directly into the input on the AudioFuse 16Rig. You could record that dry direct signal into your DAW, but simultaneously route the direct through in the analog domain back out to an amplifier and track that at the same time. Or if you just want to monitor through an amplifier while you record through the line inputs, you can do that as well. So a lot of flexibility being able to directly route those inputs back to the outputs, and any input can be assigned to be the direct through for that. Finally, these 2 outputs can also serve as reamp outputs. So if you have a direct guitar you've recorded into your DAW, you can send it back out. All the impedance and level matching is correct to route that back into an amplifier so you can track that using a microphone. I mentioned we have the main headphone output, that's over here on this side of the front panel. We have a volume control, and we have both 1/4" and 1/8" connections for that. So that's basically our analog I/O for the AudioFuse 16Rig, but we also have digital I/O. And that's in the form of 2 sets of ADAT inputs and outputs. Up to 48 kilohertz, you can get 16 channels of ADAT in and out simultaneously, but you can also set that up at higher sample rates. It gives you fewer channels, but you can still access those digital inputs and outputs even at higher sample rates. The AudioFuse 16Rig can operate at up to 192 kilohertz. The back panel also features 3 MIDI 5-pin DIN connectors. One of those is an input, and 2 of those can be either an output or a through. So you can do a lot of versatile routing for your MIDI connections there, but we're not done with just those DIN connections. On the front panel, we also have a USB MIDI connection. So we can connect a controller right here, route it straight in. In fact, we can route it to those DIN outputs. We can use it to control all the settings inside the AudioFuse 16Rig. So that MIDI input on the front panel via USB gives us, again, a great deal of versatility. Part of that versatility comes from the fact that the AudioFuse 16Rig can be operated completely standalone. You can do almost everything right from the front panel. The only thing you can't do is access the routing matrix, and we'll take a look at the routing matrix in the software. You'll instantly see why, because it's a huge matrix that allows a lot of flexibility. But let's take a look at how easy it is to use the front panel to set things up. So I've connected a Universal Audio Bach 187 microphone. I've really been loving this microphone lately. It's a large diaphragm condenser. It's coming into input 1. Now on the front panel, you can see we have all these icons. As we scroll through, we're actually accessing different settings. So this is our input settings. If I push the knob, it calls up my input meters. But I can also select the individual channels if I push again. So now I'm on channel 1. I could also access that by pushing the button here. But this gives me a gain control. Here, let's push. Gives me a gain control. If I push again, I can access a pad, polarity invert. We can also switch that input to access the back panel input instead of the front panel input. And of course I have 48 volt phantom power, which is essential for this condenser mic. And one thing I really like is when I activate that by pushing the button, it actually ramps up slowly, so we're not going to get a big pop. It's going to slowly bring up the 48 volt phantom power and activate this microphone for us. To control the gain on the preamp, I just scroll back over, push, and now I can access the level. Of course we have a meter here, check 1, 2. By pushing the return button, we can jump back to all of the channels, the meters for all 16 channels, check 1, 2. And we can also return to our menu by pushing that as well. So we can scroll through the different options. This would set up our outputs, for example. This would access the mixer and so on. There actually are 2 mixers inside the AudioFuse 16Rig, as we'll see. There's a main mixer and there's also a Q mixer. It's a little easier to see what's happening with those inside the software, so we'll take a look at those in just a second. But you can also access those right here on the front panel. An important feature is that we can actually access save and load here. So if you save a setup and you want to recall it, you can do it from the front panel. You don't have to be connected to the software to do that. And that again just reinforces that point that this can serve as a completely standalone device. You can use it live on stage, run all your devices into the back panel. You have full mixer control here. You can run everything via MIDI, even without a computer, by 5-pin or using the USB MIDI connection. You can control the mixer using MIDI. All this can be done standalone. Really makes it a fantastic centerpiece for a live rig as well. One more thing to touch on before we jump over to the software, and that's that the AudioFuse 16Rig actually has a built-in USB hub. So it connects by USB-C to your Mac or Windows computer. And then we have a front panel USB port and a back panel USB port. This is great for connecting dongles, iLocks, those sorts of things. But any USB compatible gear, a thumb drive for example, whatever it might be, can connect there and be accessed from the computer or other devices that are connected to the USB hub function of this. So having taken a tour of the AudioFuse 16Rig, let's jump over to the software and take a look there. I think you'll see how all this lays out and the incredible versatility and comprehensiveness that this audio interface provides. So this is the AudioFuse Control Center software, and it brings together everything that the AudioFuse 16Rig can do. Now it's broken up into 5 different screens plus a few different settings here. Very easy to navigate because it lets you see what you need to see for a particular task. So starting up here at the upper left, we can size the window from 50% up to 100%. So you can set that however you like. 70% fits my monitor pretty well. We can also access the manual from here, which is very handy. Here on the main screen, we can access our audio inputs and outputs. We've got analog here on the upper left and the analog outputs. Here we've got gain control, pad, polarity reverse. We can switch to use the rear connections or the front connections if we like. We can stereo link. So all of that can be done right here in this main window. Similarly, we have ADAT input channels here, we have ADAT output channels here, and the cool thing is you might notice that there's nothing here in the scribble strips at the top. We can actually type in whatever we want there, and it will drop that in. So we can rename these channels, for example. If channel 12 is a synth, we can label that synth. That makes it very easy to organize what's happening inside your mixer. You can also see a loop back here, which is a handy function if you're live streaming or if you need to bring an app into your computer and route it through the AudioFuse 16Rig. You can do that using loopback. Next up, we can access the main mixer, and that's right here, but you might notice the screen's actually blank, and that's because you can configure this however you like. So if we click, I can choose to look at whatever analog inputs I want to look at. I can look at ADAT inputs. I can also look at sources coming back from the computer. So all that can be blended into our mixer as well. So once we have our channels configured the way we want, we have control over levels, of course, our main levels here, and then our channel levels here across the bottom. We have mute, solo, we have pan, and we also have 4 aux sends. Now because it's so flexible the way you can route things inside the AudioFuse 16Rig using this control center, and we'll take a look at that routing matrix in just a second, you can send these auxes pretty much anywhere you want. They could go to a headphone out. They could go to any of the analog or digital outputs. You can also route them to USB to send them into your computer. Then you could bring that back using computer returns if you want to use plugins to process a track. We also have a second mixer, the Q mixer. And again, we can configure that however we like with whatever channels we want to use. Just like that. Now the Q mixer does not have aux sends because it's already set up to be a Q mix. And we can route that, again, wherever we want. Any pair of outputs can receive our stereo Q mix. Now all this routing I've been talking about takes place here in the routing matrix. And this can look pretty heavy, pretty intimidating, but it's really very simple. We've got our inputs here across the top. So we can look at the analog inputs, USB, ADAT, whatever we might want to look at. And then down the side are our destinations. So for example, I've got my 16 analog inputs routed to 16 inputs to the computer via USB. Back here at the top, I've got my main outputs from the mixer routed to my monitor outputs. I've got my 4 auxes feeding outputs 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I've got my Q mixer feeding my headphone output. Now it's very easy to change, or actually to route to multiple destinations. So right now I have the main mix left and right. I've got aux 2, aux 3, and the Q mix all feeding the headphones. I don't know why you'd do that, but maybe there would be a situation where you'd want to do that. But what this does is give you extremely flexible routing capabilities. So if you're experimenting with sound design, if you're routing out to effects, bringing back in, if you're using external filters, external synthesizers to process sounds, if you're bringing microphones in and sending them to different destinations, if you're trying to set up a custom monitoring situation, you can do all that very easily using this routing matrix. Next up, we have the MIDI configuration page, and this is where we set things up for MIDI control, of course. Now this can be either hosted, which means that we're using a computer to serve as the control over the AudioFuse 16Rig, or we can set it to standalone, where we don't need a computer at all. Everything can be done right from the front panel of the AudioFuse 16Rig or controlled via MIDI. Now when we're in standalone, we can set up where the control is coming from the 5-pin connections, from the USB host on that front panel. So you can do that. We also have our standalone MIDI sources, whatever connection you're using, as well as destinations. So this can serve as a MIDI routing matrix as well. We can see our MIDI activity, input and output. And then we can also map controllers to our individual mixer channels too. So very flexible, very versatile. We can save and load presets here. We can set our sample rate. We can set our clock source. And we have some general settings as well. Now our audio settings allow us to access some of those same things, clock source, sample rate. We can also force at high sample rates the ADAT outputs to conform to that. We can set word clock termination. We can pass through word clock. So lots of features here. But an important one is the monitoring button mode. So on that front panel, you remember there was an assignable button. This is where we set up what that does. It can mono the speakers, it can dim the speakers, or engage a second set of alternate speakers. You can also set the dim level here. And if we have A/B configuration enabled so that we are switching to a second set of speakers, we can now trim the level of that set. We can set what output channels are feeding those speakers. So it's very comprehensive as far as setting all of that up. We also have preferences. We can do firmware updates from here and so on. One thing I forgot to show you back here on the mixer, and that's that on those outputs 3 and 4 on the front panel, this is where we assign those 4 different modes of operation for those 2 outputs: line level, reamp, direct through, or alternate headphones. So you really can take charge of everything from the AudioFuse Control Center. So what's cool about this is that it's just such a slick way of working. You can either do it right on your computer screen like this, or you can do it from the front panel. You can operate standalone. So much versatility, and it's so comprehensive as far as the I/O and the control capabilities that you're provided. One other thing to talk about with the AudioFuse 16Rig is that it offers fantastic sound quality. They've used premium high-performance analog to digital and digital to analog converters. They've used the best clocking. They've used the best design strategies to create a device that sounds fantastic whether you're using it analog, digital, standalone, or hosted by the computer. Arturia also provides you with the Arturia Creative Suite, which will get you started right out of the box. That includes Analog Lab Intro, which is virtual instruments, as well as 10 Arturia plugins. So you'll be ready to go right when you take this out of the box. It can be rack-mounted, or it can sit on your desktop as I have it here. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Arturia AudioFuse 16Rig. There's so much to talk about here. I mean, we went through a ton of stuff, but there's even more inside the AudioFuse 16Rig. It sounds fantastic, and again, it may just be the most comprehensive audio interface I've ever encountered. Check this out. I think you'll find it's a great addition to either your studio or your live rig. If you want complete information about the AudioFuse 16 rig, jump over to sweetwater.com and check out the product page for all the details, or better yet, contact your Sweetwater sales engineer. They have full information on the AudioFuse 16, and they can certainly describe to you how this can serve as a centerpiece for an incredible rig for you. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.